Okay, next thing we're going to cover is weapon retention from our 6 different positions, our 3 positions at advantage and our 3 positions at disadvantage. Once again, just like in edge weapon defense, the priority here once a subject grabs my gun is weapon retention. The ground combatives is secondary. The primary focus now is on retaining my weapon. Once I've retained my weapon and I've broken this subject's hands free of my gun, that's both hands free of my gun, then I'm free to go back to ground combatives. So we have to understand the priorities here. I'm going to go ahead and work with just a wooden gun here on my side. Here later on in the video, we'll have an officer suited up to show you the real firearm in play, as well as what it's like to work with his vest on, his radio, OC spray, and all the different things he has to be concerned about when he's involved in ground combatives. First position, of course, the officer's in the mount. I always have to be conscious when I'm in these positions that I have a sidearm on, that the subject being in this position or any other position on the ground, it's a violent encounter. The chances of him attempting to take my weapon are very, very high, and I have to be conscious of that. Fortunately, in this day and age, we have some good security holsters out there that are going to help us retain our weapon. We have to remember, too, in this weapon retention and ground combatives, we're always talking two-hand control techniques. Two-hand control technique for me on my pistol is strong hand is going to be pushing down, pushing the gun in its holster with my finger straight away from me. The support hand is coming across, resting on top of my strong hand, and both hands are pushing my weapon back into its holster. He's trying to pull it out. I'm trying to push it back in its holster and letting the security rig do its job. Another thing that we have to be conscious of is we can work in here. If I'm working against Daniel and I'm in a good mount position, I want to be conscious that he could take my weapon. I want to keep an elbow close to that gun so that when he starts to move towards the weapon, I've always got a block system already in place to get him off my gun. So anytime I can keep him from ever grabbing it, I'm going to do that. But we're going to talk about worst case scenario here. Let's say he does grab it. He comes in, he takes the pistol. I'm trapping the hands down like I always do. I'm always going to squeeze his hands and push down on his hand and then violently and aggressively move my body in the opposite direction that his wrist doesn't go. So I'm turning violently in this position here, trying to break that grip off of my gun. You see it now already starting to peel away. So that's what I'm attempting to do. Here again, because I'm not concerned anymore with ground combatives, I'm concerned with weapon retention. When I get that hand in that position there, you're talking about total disengagement here. Total disengagement. And we'll come back and deal with the problem after I've freed my gun. And now I know he's upped the ante a little bit, made it even more of a violent situation. We may be into a deadly force application now because he's attempted to take my weapon. Once again, if he reaches across, we know that when one hand comes, the other hand's going to come. If he comes across with this hand first, there again, we're going to trap it down, squeeze hard, push my gun back in the holster, and now I can use my forearm on the back of his elbow. There again, pushing, going right in, breaking the hand free of my weapon. The one thing that I'm not going to do here is take one of my hands off my gun. There's a lot of schools out there and a lot of instruction that's saying trap your gun in its holster with one hand, use your free hand to deliver some type of radial nerve strikes to the arm. You're going to get killed if you use those techniques. The priority here is not offense, it's defense. Trap your gun into its holster with both your hands. Obviously, he's going to be coming over here with both his hands to get it out. I'm pushing down violently, and in this position here, anytime I have a cross-arm position like that, I can rotate my body, and through proper body mechanics, break his hands free of my gun. Okay, it's real important here now, because we have the firearm present, that when we go into the side mount position here, if I can, I've done the takedown, I've gotten him on the ground, and I've got him in the side mount, ready to get him in the side mount position. I want to try to trap that hand with my body as best I can. That prohibits this right here from happening. He'll attempt to take my gun. So I want to try to trap that hand any way I can. It may be some type of trap of this nature, and I'm going to hold that in there so that he can't get my weapon. Let's say, however, though, that hasn't occurred. I came in here for the side mount, I screwed up, I feel the tug on my pistol immediately. Two-hand control techniques. Be conscious, keeping my head down. Sticky man philosophy here applies. Standing close to the subject, pushing my gun back in its holster. And once again, I'm going to roll in the direction that his wrist doesn't go. His wrist doesn't go that way. You see his hand peeling off right away. I'm using my entire body weight now to roll in the direction his wrist doesn't go. His wrist goes this way. It doesn't go this way very well. Another thing I can do is I can be in a modified side mount position, and when he reaches for my gun there again, I can come into here and go to this arm bar. Okay? If I catch him at the prep time, go to the arm bar. If I catch him, if I'm in the side mount, he goes for my pistol. Two-hand control techniques, pushing it down, and here again I can possibly rotate and go into this arm bar right here. Okay? So that's what I want to do. And then thirdly, if I have failed to trap the arm properly, another thing that I might be able to do in this position is lay on my gun. Move my body onto my gun, which puts his hand out of position to take my weapon. Understand, I'm not in a good base here. I'm not really concerned about that at this moment, only because my priority here has shifted from ground combatives to weapon retention. Once I've retained my gun, then I'm going to move into proper ground combatives. Okay, the officer has the subject in the guard now. Here again, elbows in close to his weapon to protect it, conscious of what things can happen. I can still affect some of my chokes, do different things up here by working and bringing the body in close to me. When the subject reaches for my pistol, there again, both hands on, it's a death grip there. Very tight, pushing the gun back into its holster, rotating my body out to the direction of my pistol, turning my hips, and attempting there again to free his grip off of my gun. And once that has been accomplished, I can either go back to offense now or do total disengagement. But the bottom line is, both hands have to stay on my gun. If he comes in here and he reaches in a cross grip, same type of setup applies. Muscle memory puts my hands in the exact same position. Here again, I'm going to rotate my hips out of the way and violently get his body out of the way, laying on my gun, laying on his hands, and laying on my hands, which breaks the grip from the pistol. Okay, now the officer's at a distinct disadvantage here because the subject's in the mount. Here again, the subject makes a move for the pistol. I'm locking it in. Notice now that when the subject locks it in, he kind of takes away one of those table legs of his base. I can buck and go in the direction that he's going already and try to break that wrist right there as he's coming off there. Rotate back this way. That breaks that gun loose. Or I can take him in the same direction like we did before in our edge weapon defense. Here again, I trap the arm, a tremendous amount of power in bucking and turning my body, and trying to reverse that position and get him off my gun. There again, using his body weight to help peel him off my weapon. Last thing I'm going to do, both hands coming off the gun. The hands are going to stay on the gun the entire time. Any part of his hands are on my pistol. Another thing I can do here is as he reaches across and I pin his hands down in here, is I can buck him off again. This puts a lot of torque on his wrist and his elbow. Taking him in this position here, it immediately breaks the grip, and I may be in position here to come up into some type of arm bar or leg lock or whatever it is I need to do to get him right for handcuffing. The officer's in a position of disadvantage here. The subject's in the side mount. Here again, my weapon's in play. Most of the time, we've talked about moving our hips out of the way to work our position into a counter here. Notice now that in this position, when he reaches for my gun, immediate two-hand control here again, it's a good possibility I'm going to rotate my hips this way to lay on my gun is an option, or we can trap those hands like we've been doing and violently turn back in towards the subject and working against that wrist, using our feet to come into positions, breaking that grip right there we want to go. Your hand strength here, or your ability to cling on with two hands is critical there again, because any type of slipping as he rotates his hand inside my hand takes away some of the leverage that I have. So once again, when I grab, I don't allow any rotation in there of the hand. I've got him pretty tight and secure, and I'm not going to let that go away from me. So once again, if I didn't possess the ability to rotate and kick my hips out in this particular fashion, which we'll do in a second, then by simply lying on my gun, I may buy a sufficient amount of time with all my hips and weight on my gun to keep my weapon retained, which is the priority here. If I do possess the strength and power to become offensive, then I'm going to do just that. I'm going to trap his hands in there and rotate and kick my body out the other way and eventually try to get into some position this way. Okay. Oftentimes when we talk about ground combatives and we show them in a series and sections of how they're occurring, I don't want you to forget that throughout all these ground combatives, we are striking, elbowing, kneeing, punching, whatever we can do to help buy time, to help soften up the subject so that we can get him into a position of compliance. So although you may see me doing a technique and not necessarily softening the subject up prior to that technique, please don't forget that in all these encounters we would be using our entire body as a weapon. Okay, and lastly, where am I in your guard? Okay, now I'm in the subject's guard. He's at the position of advantage. I'm in a position of a disadvantage. There again, as he comes up to grab the weapon, I immediately lock it in like I always do. The position of his wrist naturally folds this way. If that's the case, I want to take it opposite direction. I come up and turn violently into his wrist, breaking the grip, coming off my gun. It's all a matter of body mechanics. If you're strong, you can just do a technique that much easier, but it's really body mechanics, it's not strength. Same thing here again, we trap it down. We see that the elbow's in a good position to apply pressure, leaning forward, applying pressure on that arm, simply breaking his hand away. Understand, my whole goal in these weapon retention drills is to retain my weapon. Please retain your weapon. 2 hands on your gun will retain your weapon. 1 hand on your gun may be a fatal mistake. Okay, just as we're assuming here the officers are the only one with the firearm, we know that's not a good assumption. So we're going to show what can happen here where the officer's in position. In this particular case, I'm in the mount position, which is position of advantage for me. I've done my job well. Now all of a sudden the subject produces a firearm. Immediately when I see the firearm coming out, it's the same thing as we do with our edge weapon defense. We're talking about 2-hand control techniques. I really have to be careful now of any of this motion of the muzzle coming back towards my face. So I have an extra responsibility now of keeping myself down low, paying attention not only where the firearm is. This is not an edge weapon anymore, but paying more importantly attention where the muzzle is. So in other words, he could have the firearm there and the muzzle's pointing back to me. He gets his thumb inside the trigger guard and pulls the trigger. I'm in bad shape. So there again, I want to know where the muzzle is. I can help isolate the positioning of that muzzle simply by coming up a little bit higher with my death grip on his wrist. Notice how I've put my thumb in the palm of his hand against the base of the meat of his thumb there. Crisscross my thumbs, now rotate the gun in. Makes it very difficult here again, not through strength, but through just leverage. Leverage is a good thing for us. And so as he starts to rotate that muzzle in, I'm in a good position here. My sole focus here is don't let this guy point that muzzle back to me. Okay? If I've made a position, I've come in here and I've isolated and I've ended up in this position, I'm going to attempt to use the squeezing and that alligator death grip again to squeeze hard against the trigger guard. If his finger's in the trigger, maybe perhaps through the rotation and manipulation of his hand, I can cause a lot of pain on his trigger finger there, possibly even snap and break his trigger finger. Makes it very uncomfortable for him, buys me a lot more time. We run the same problem here that we had initially on the fact that he can switch hands. I'm in here tight. He comes over to the other hand. I've got to play the gamble there of what he's going to do because he could easily fake me out, come in here and I'll make the shift, and now I'm in trouble. So when he does that, he comes over, I'll play them both. When he's made his decision on what he's going to do, I'm 2-hand control. My eyes are on the muzzle of the weapon. The muzzle of the weapon. Just like with the edge weapon defense, this guy may pull the gun from a waistband. As he pulls it out, he's in a prep position now. I don't have the same, I have the same priorities of his strength level, but I've got to make sure muzzle's away from me. I've constantly got to be controlled. Now, I can help control the muzzle of that weapon here by dropping my forearm down and keeping that gun away from me by simply doing that. So a good tight grip here is going to help us out when he's in the prep attack position. Always when he's in the attack position, it's 2-hand control, eyes on the muzzle. Notice how I drop my center of gravity anytime this stuff is going on to use that sticky man philosophy to stay in here close to the subject. I don't want to be up high. I want to be down here and low where I can watch the muzzle. Any strikes he's doing to me, any scratching, any biting, anything else he's doing is all second nature. Thank God with the adrenaline that I'm going to have pumping through my body, I'm not going to feel any of that stuff anyway. My adrenaline's all going to be focused into my hands to control that weapon from shooting.